May I have your attention, please? This tape is... May I have your attention, please? This tape is on Francois Chardin, C-H-A-R-D-I-N. Put in the first slide, please. Jean-Baptiste Francois Chardin was born in Paris in 1699. This puts him in the date of the French court, that of the Louis, and he lived until 1779, so he died shortly before the French Revolution. He was born of middle-class parentage and lived and operated mostly on what was called the bourgeois society of French culture at that time, and oddly enough became fairly well known even though he was not connected with the court in any way whatsoever. His father, in 1724, apprenticed him to the Guild of St. Luke's, which was the artist guild at that time. It wasn't as noteworthy as belonging to the Royal Academy, but it was sort of an organization or a union of the fine artists of that period. And even then, the artists of the period would do many things other than paintings. They would do decorations, signs, and so forth. Chardin's first notice of fame came when he did a sign board for a friend who was a combination surgeon and barber, which was not an unusual combination in that day and time. The man who could cut on anything was considered a surgeon, a barber, a little bit of everything. But most of his paintings neatly fall into three categories. The first one that he gained most of his fame with were still lifes. The one that you see on the screen now is called the Attributes to Music, and they're arranged very similarly to most of Chardin's compositions. He was well liked in his day because he sort of imitated the earlier Dutch painters of the 17th century with their love for detail and love for household objects or objects that people were familiar with. This one's a little more crowded than most of Chardin's work, but it is sort of an allegory in painting to the art of music. Slide, please. Another, not a companion piece, but companion in subject matter, is Attributes to the Arts. And here you have the Legion of Honor medal winner in the medal hanging over the edge of the table. You have some of attributes toward building architecture. You have the palette. You have the pieces of sculpture that in that day and time was necessary to learn to draw by, in different books and portfolios on paintings. In the perspective of this, everything sort of pulls your eye toward the center of the painting with the rolled up papers aiming toward the vanishing point on the right-hand side, and the books neatly placed aiming your eye toward the distant perspective point on the left-hand side. Slide, please. But it was this painting that he achieved his fame and his nomination to the Royal Academy. This was in 1728, and it is called the Skate, S-K-A-T-E. It's what we would call a stingray or a man of war today. Chardin was called the kitchen painter, and from this you can easily see why. He was also very authentic in his detail. Most of his objects were painted from his own household objects, and the black ceramic pitcher in the right-hand side of this composition neatly placed, aiming your eye in toward the composition and sort of keeping it from sliding off the edge of the painting, appears in many of his paintings, and you can almost tell to the year when Madame Chardin must have broken the picture, because it appears in no more of his paintings. This is a delightful thing in the sort of dark, moody manner of the Dutch painters, but with a lot of life, sort of a simplicity of the selection of the objects. The cat sort of with hair on end, having jumped up on the ledge, finding all this paraphernalia of fish, oyster shells, the large skate in the background that has obviously in the hooking of it has gashed out one side. All of this is faithfully represented. He also is a master, as Rembrandt was, in dark and light patterns. Although Rembrandt was much more direct in his light and dark patterns, Chardin, the same was as Vermeer, with the light usually coming in from the left-hand side, sort of has a dramatic light that sweeps across at a very low level, lighting each object individually like a separate jewel in a ring setting. Slide, please. This another kitchen still life. You will find many objects that he uses over and over again. The mortar and pestle for grinding garlic on the right-hand side, you will see in other paintings. The copper cauldron in many sizes you will see. But he would take simple objects that he would find in his kitchen, arrange them on this ledge to sort of pull the center of interest of the painting up more into the middle of the composition, and then usually have something such as in this, the chicken neck, the side of beef, the white towels hanging over the ledge, break this very strong horizontal bar that goes entirely across the lower portion of the composition. The light comes in from the left. He very subtly handles his background, which is usually blank. It is only slight gradations of tone, with the dark on the right, on the left, to the light on the right, to sort of balance or contrast the opposite lighting of the objects. Whereas in the very light ceramic picture here, you have a very dark background contrasted against the white side of the picture, and the background becomes lighter on the dark side of the picture so that the objects will stand out. Slide, please. This composition is called the clay pipe, and it is one of a period where he worked in fairly heavy paint, putting his strokes on broadly. He usually worked in his paintings first staining the canvas a fairly dark brown. Then on top of that he would work in his sketch, and then first put in the dark colors. Then he would put in the light colors, working back and forth over it. One of the artists of his period, in some notes and anecdotes about Chardin, writes this little thing about Chardin's work, that he applies color one after another, and up close it almost resembles patchwork quilt. Velázquez, a Spanish painter, was one of the first painters to do this, what is called direct painting, applying the paint directly without too much blending. This, of course, later on in the study of light in the Impressionist period, around the latter part of the 19th century, was how they broke up light patterns. There were no finishing lines on Chardin's work. The lines leave themselves a little bit fuzzy on the edges, so that although his paintings are sort of patchworky and fairly rough in detail, you have the same feeling even looking at them up close as you have from a distance. They all take their place beautifully because of this perfect balance of light and dark. each object has enough room on the ledge. It creates the space through this sort of strong side lighting with the shadows, as in the little silver cup over on the left-hand side of this composition, casting the shadow across the ledge. Slide, please. It was known that Chardin never worked from imagination, that he always had the object right there, and the object stayed exactly in the same spot until the canvas was finished. It is known, that fact is known because of one painting he wrote that he had to leave a painting of a dead rabbit unfinished because the rabbit had gone bad before he had had a chance to finish the painting. Most of Chardin's work is quite small, very small, say 10 by 12 inches, a lot of them, or at the most, the largest compositions may be 18 by 20 or 18 by 24 inches, much smaller than you see it on the screen now. Slide, please. This one, called A Jar of Olives, was also in one of the salons in Paris. This was after his nomination to the Royal Academy. And it was noted at the time that he got a tremendous effect of the olives sort of floating through the water and through the glass so that they're slightly misty in their presentation. The little Dresden compote over on the right-hand side will be seen again in another of his paintings. We have a detail of this area in the left-hand side of the wine glass and the quince, where again the stem of the quince breaks the strong ledge of the horizontal pattern across the bottom of the composition. Something else that he usually would do is a knife, such as in the left-hand side, or he would put splits or breaks in that ledge. Slide, please. In this, he has definitely the same characteristics as the earlier Dutch masters, especially with the darker use of tone and of color and of clear glass or of liquid in the glass and the shimmer of the reflection of the glass. Slide, please. Chardin's work is extremely intriguing. The beautiful light that falls on the objects, the almost crystal clear except loose, beautiful feeling that he gets in his paintings, the feeling of china, the feeling of the textures of the different materials. And it is also sort of like seeing a familiar face when you see different objects used over and over again. Like this, the porcelain pot in the direct center is of the same set that the little maybe sugar urn or compote is from. The toweling, the little red table over on the right, we will see again in a later painting. But these are sort of homey, atmospheric type paintings, except beautifully done. Slide, please. This one is only 10 by 14 inches, and it crowds an awful lot into the composition. Most of Chardin's works are in fairly dangerous condition today. There has been crazing or cracking, and since they were painted on canvas, some of the canvas is deteriorating, and they're in fairly fragile condition now. So you very seldom get to see a lone exhibition of Chardin's work because people just don't like to let them travel. His paint in this one is piled on. He would continually work over and over a painting, building up the paint until he was satisfied with the correct relationships of color patches. Most of his things were done on a ledge or a tabletop such as this with a fairly narrow depth of field. You have a feeling that the ledge was only about 12 to 14 inches deep, and the stucco or plaster wall is directly behind the objects. Slide, please. This is one of a companion piece. Both of these are fairly small. In this one, he breaks the edge of the ledge with this scallion or leek as it is called, made in onion soup. This sort of sliver of vegetable crossing over the strong horizontal ledge, with the green part back on the lighter section of the top of the ledge and the white end of the little onion into the shadow of the front part of the ledge. The paint is fairly crusty on this. The light source again from the left, the light gleaming on the copper cauldron. Slide, please. And more or less the companion piece to the last one, they're about the same size. The same copper cauldron, this time though a knife breaks the strong horizontal of the ledge. We've seen the mortar and pestle before in another painting. But there was nothing prosaic about his paintings. They were very simple, direct statements of still life. And this was slightly unusual other than in the Dutch. For the French, he was one of the very first French artists to use still life as a legitimate subject matter. Now, Vermeer did some beautiful still lifes, except he incorporated them in his figurative paintings. Slide, please. Slide, please. I like this one very much of Chardin's. Each grape is carefully painted in, except you still have a feeling of the whole cluster in the basket. As with any of the paintings, it is really difficult to get the true richness of the color or of the quality of the painting through a reproduction or through a slide. It really does take seeing an original to appreciate the beautiful brushwork and technique of a Chardin. Slide, please. Slide, please. I think this is one of the most beautiful presentations of a glass of water with the dark background in the left-hand side behind the picture. And this picture is very similar to the dark green one, but it must have been in the collection of the Chardin household. But the water, if you can imagine trying to paint a glass of clear water against a very dark background, the economy of means, just a few little heightened highlights, a few little brilliant accents of light catching on the surface of the rim of the glass, the surface of the water, and down toward the depth of the glass and the thickness of the material itself. Slide, please. We've seen the picture again. Most of the things in his household were painted over and over again. He did quite a few paintings during his lifetime. Some of them it is a little more difficult to date, because he painted mostly still lifes during the first part of his career, and then turned to figurative painting during the last part of his life. He was elected treasurer of the Royal Academy at one point. Slide, please. He never tired of the composition and used it over and over again, the narrow depth of field, the ledge, something usually breaking the ledge, and simple objects sort of strewn along the edge, but very carefully arranged. A lot of times he uses the perspective of the handle, such as in the mug, to lead your eye into the painting and as a stop from slipping off the edge of the composition. Slide, please. This is probably one of my favorite paintings of all times. It is called the dessert, or the brioche. A brioche is a slightly sweet bread that is sometimes served as a dessert in France. It puffs up. It's quite airy, almost like a cream puff. And to decorate it, they put in a sprig of blossoms, in this case orange blossoms, into the top before they bring it to the table. This is so much of a Chardin and so beautifully done, a little bit smoother than most of his. The little Dresden dish over on the covered dish over on the left-hand side, just seems to sparkle against the dark background. If you look closely, you can see the crazing in the dark background of this painting and get some sort of idea of the size of it. It is, I believe, about 14 by 16 inches, somewhere in that range. One of the nice things that is in the painting that you miss in a reproduction, because it does seem to flatten it out, are the beautiful little cherries right near the edge on the right-hand side of this composition, and the gleam of the sort of gold gilt on the decanter that nicely forms a vertical and stops your eye in that side of the composition. Slide, please. This is a little out of character, a bouquet of flowers. And this makes the transition from his traditional still life painting into the figurative work. There was another area that he did that people were very fond of for some reason, and those were his hunting paintings of the dead game. Slide. They were arranged in much the same manner as his kitchen utensils or utilitarian objects. And I believe it was in this one that he made this statement. Here is an object to be painted. To achieve a truthful rendering of it, I must forget everything I have seen, and even the way in which such objects have been treated by others. I must place it sufficiently far away not to be able to see the details. I must apply myself to copying with the greatest diligence the general masses, the shades of color, the curves, the effects of light and shadow. So this was his philosophy or approach toward painting. He had to approach things with a fresh eye, put things down, not be intimidated by the detailing of, say in this one, of painting each hair in the rabbit, but putting himself far enough away from the object so he gets sort of the general overall effect or the essence of what he is painting. Please. This one was rabbits and a pheasant. Many times he uses the quince, which is sort of like an apple, in his paintings for a little touch of color, the warmth of the color. And as one time we have seen it, using the stem to break the ledge. Slide, please. About the only deviation he made from the ledge painting was when the objects were placed on the floor and you have more of a higher horizon perspective looking down on the objects. This one, although it looks very realistic in a slide, is quite broadly painted, where he painted or sort of smudged in a tone for the hair on the rabbit, and then just with a few flecks of the brush gives the whole feeling of the soft hair of the rabbit. The crack is actually painted in the wall in the background. Slide, please. Another series of paintings that he did later in his life, introducing the figure into painting, were the working class of people. This one coming from market or the cook or something of that sort. From the last slide, if you remember the large copper cistern, oh no, I don't believe we have seen it yet. I think I've placed it in the next one. But look at the large copper cistern standing on the floor in the background of this painting. Now, slide, please. He does a painting of that, and we see another familiar object, the black, shiny ceramic pitcher in the lower right-hand corner. Again, he places it to lead your eye back into the composition, pushing the perspective. He had a beautiful technique of this shine on copper, and the softness of the little detail of the ring on the cistern or the spigot down below, catching the sort of glinty light in these little areas of detail. Slide, please. The washerwoman. These slightly remind us of Vermeer, except in these, the working class of people, they're slightly cruder, more like Vermeer's painting of the cook. Except Vermeer would flood his paintings with light, this diffuse light. Vermeer had a very light, delicate feeling to his paintings, whereas Chardin's are much more in the Dutch tradition of the darker, more somber color tones. Slide, please. The cellar boy. Slide. The chambermaid. Most of these look slightly posed. They were probably servants in his household that he used as models. Slide, please. The governess. She brushes off the tri-cornered hat for the young gentleman. In Chardin's simple approach to painting, it gives us a very nice insight to 18th century French middle-class homes, the furnishings, the costumes, or the clothing of the time. He very lets us have much distance in the paintings. There's either a wall or a screen, or in his still lifes, the wall directly behind the objects. Slide, please. Notice the gray and white striped dress. We'll see it several times again. The nice little portrait of the dog in the lower left-hand corner of the painting. Slide, please. Saying Grace, which is a sort of nice, sweet little genre scene of the time. Again, the nice pot in the lower right-hand corner, perspective-wise, keeping that from being a dead area, pushing your eye back into the painting. Slide, please. Slide, please. Slide, please. This is considered one of his masterpieces of figurative painting, and he uses a lower horizon line. Your eyes are just about on level with the tabletop, looking up toward the two figures. Slide, please. This is a little more delicate in color scheme. The little red table that we saw in the earlier painting, I've often wondered, with the drawer pulled out on both, if the drawer was stuck and just wouldn't be pushed all the way in. And it's always slightly bothered me, the teapot there just about to fall into that open drawer. But the gray and white striped dress, the light from the left, the fairly close, shallow background. He gets away with leaving a lot of background space. Most people find this very difficult in a painting, to leave large areas that don't become just holes that you look into. Slide, please. Painting of the draftsman, and he did another version of this one. Slide, please. Completely different, where the artist is sitting on the floor sketching, or obviously copying the nude sketch that's pinned to the wall, and the backs of the canvas stretchers in the right-hand side sort of breaking up that area of the painting. Slide, please. He did many of his paintings over and over again. It is possible that he was not satisfied with the surface or the color in one and would do another version of it. This is called the bubble blower. This is a detail of the composition. The man is actually leaning out the sill of a window, and there's sort of a vine that climbs around the opening of the window up above him. There are two versions of this, one in the Louvre and one in the Metropolitan in New York. Slide, please. And one little area where most of his genre scenes were sort of interior scenes. Then he did some delightful paintings of children at different games, sort of moving in closer to the model. This is building a house of cards. Slide, please. A spinning top. Slide, please. Writing a letter. Slide, please. Playing badminton. I can imagine our girls trying to play badminton in a costume like that today. Slide, please. Toward the end of his life, he switched to pastels, and he did 2 portraits of himself. These are in pastels rather than in oils. And they're sort of silly versions. He has a green shade. Most of the artists at that time, because of the coldness of the weather, did wrap their heads, especially as they got older, in some sort of a bandana or a cloth. Even Rembrandt, we see portraits of him in sort of like a turban to keep the cold air away from the possibly bald head. Slide, please. And a little older version of a Chardin portrait in pastel. Slide, please. For our review, the first artist was Giotto, Giotto, blue backgrounds, flat gold halos, no strong shadows, oriental look to eyes. The important figures are larger. Slide, please. Da Vinci, D-A, capital V-I-N-C-I. Fantasy, rocky background, oval face, no eyebrows.
Slide, please. Michelangelo, who was later in the Renaissance, created figures, muscle figures, very active composition. The figures themselves were active. It's Michelangelo. Slide, please. Of the 2 Flemish painters that we had, Jan van Eyck, V-A-N, capital E-Y-C-K, presented a world in surface detail. The skin surface, the wrinkles in the eyes, the texture of cloth or leather or fur. The anatomy wasn't as important as it was in the Italian school, but the many, many details that would interest the person's eye was the important part in the Flemish painting. Slide, please. And Peter Bruegel, who is a later Flemish painter, filled his canvases with stories about the country people, the country life, stories from the Bible. But the high horizon line, lots of detail, color red to sort of lead your eye to areas of composition. Slide, please. Rembrandt was one of the 2 Dutch painters who studied, basically a portrait painter. He painted people. Photographers call it Rembrandt lighting, R-E-M-B-R-A-N-D-T. And its areas of the canvas are spotlighted to catch your attention, and the rest of the canvas is in dark, warm brown shadows. Slide, please. Sort of the opposite of Rembrandt was the master of light, and that was Vermeer, V-E-R-M-E-E-R. When Vermeer painted interior scenes, he did paint about 2 or 3 exterior, but mostly always inside his home or his studio. Blue and gold were a favorite color scheme. Many times he used oriental rugs to sort of introduce you into the painting, like pulling back a drapery. Maps and paintings filled the background. The light was usually from the left. Slide, please. The Spanish painter was El Greco, and El Greco stretched the human figure beyond any normal length so that he could get a feeling of rhythm and movement within the figures. Anatomically, they're correct, except just extended. Very dramatic, very emotional figures. Slide, please. And Jean-Baptiste Francois Chardin, C-H-A-R-D-I-N, was a French painter at the end of the 17th century. Still life painter. He was not of the court, so he did not paint the nobility, but a rising middle class of people that were able to afford painting. And he gave great nobility to each of the objects that he placed on this narrow ledge. Also in his studio, light usually from the left-hand side. And, slide please. Later on in his life, he did the working class of people, interior scenes, genre scenes, G-E-N-R-E as it's called, are sort of slice of life, depicting ordinary, everyday occurrences. The fairly dark, warm, rich brown color. Slide, please. Clear the machine.